This is the Falls Free Press podcast, featuring bonus content from our online publication. Today's guest is Brenda Ryan, founder of the Keys to Serenity Foundation. This interview was recorded March 23rd, 2019. All right, so this is the Falls Free Press podcast, and we're here with Brenda Ryan from Keys to Serenity. Thank you for joining us, Brenda.
You're welcome.
So, I know you guys have a big event coming up in May with Keys to Serenity and OhioCAN. Before we talk about that, I want to just kind of get some backgrounds. You can tell us about your organization, also about your daughter. So I thought you might want to start by telling us about Sheena.
Okay, so my daughter Sheena lost her life to an overdose on June 9th, 2016. She was 31 years old. She was a mother. She was sober for many years, had a lot of years under her belt, and she had fought this demon at an earlier age, and she thought she kicked it. She went on to have a child, working a full-time job, and she had a short relapse, and that relapse ultimately led to her first and fatal overdose.
Wow. And she has a son.
She has a son, and he was 5.5 whenever she passed away.
And so Wyatt is his name, right?
Wyatt is his name, yes, and he is now 8 years old.
And he's with you guys.
And he is, yes. Myself and the paternal grandfather have him and I have joint custody of Wyatt. We both fought for him, and we agreed to a joint custody.
I'm currently very big into Army stuff and military stuff.
Yeah. He is into military, World War II, all the artifacts. Yeah, he's a great kid. He's smart. He's well-rounded. He's been through some trauma, obviously, and but I've made sure that he's got a lot of the mental health counseling that I thought he needed, and he's got a good support system. So
good. Well, I think that's a good transition then, because I know that a lot of what Keys to Serenity, the foundation, does is help people who've been affected by addiction, including people like Wyatt, frankly, and yourself.
Right.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Keys to Serenity is actually a nonprofit that I started after my daughter passed away in 2016. My daughter passed away June 9th, 2016, and she whenever you have a child that dies from addiction and an overdose, the parents are usually the one that picks up the pieces. They generally do not have life insurance policies, and it comes with a big bag of garbage, basically, and you have to figure out how to clean up all that garbage. You have to figure out financially how to pay for your child's last wishes. And without any insurance, that's kind of tough. What happened was my son started a GoFundMe site. And when he started that GoFundMe site, I have a lot of people that I've been here in Cuyahoga Falls for a long time, and I have a business here in Cuyahoga Falls, and my husband runs a Moose Lodge in Cuyahoga Falls, and we just had a lot of great support system, and a lot of people donated to that, and I felt like I gave my daughter everything she needed for her last wishes. And in August, 2 months later, is when we had the onslaught of carfentanil, and we were losing people left and right here in Summit County.
In 2016.
And I felt like that money needed to be paid forward that people had given me. And I started, donating some of that money and just started giving $50 checks and $40 checks. And that gave me the idea to help these families out and, to get a nonprofit started and help these families out. Also to help them out with, there was nothing for me as far as no support, as far as how to get custody of Wyatt, what's going to happen in the judicial system, because there was a dealer arrested the night of her death. Navigating all these different avenues, I had to figure it out on my own. Well, I thought if I started a nonprofit, I could maybe help these families so they could do what they need to do, and that's grieve their child, and not have to worry about, looking up all these things that like I had to do. So I felt like that would be a great. There's a lot of support out there for people to get into recovery, but there was nothing out there for the parents left behind and the families left behind. And it kind of just it got bigger and bigger. And one of the other reasons is that I wanted to I was very open about my daughter's death and how she died. And I felt that if I did that and was very honest and frank about her death, that I could help other families not be so afraid because of the stigma attached to these deaths. And they're still at that, but in 2016 it was way worse than it is now.
Yeah. So you touched on a lot of stuff there that I want to ask you about. If we could back up just a second, because I know you're somebody who knows a lot about the opiate epidemic, and it's of course affecting people in Cuyahoga Falls and Summit County in Ohio and the country and the world, right?
Absolutely.
And so can you talk to us just a little bit? So for people who aren't familiar with this, who haven't been affected by addiction, particularly opiates, can you talk a little bit about I suppose you could talk about how people become addicted. There are various ways people can become addicted, but you mentioned carfentanil.
Yes.
And I know that fentanyl is another thing, and then heroin's another thing,
Right.
and et cetera.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about those things?
So 80 to 90% of heroin users usually start with prescription opiates. And we have now, and there's controversy about this, but it's been a proven fact that addiction is a genetic disease. A lot of people don't want to call it a disease, and but it is. It's been classified as a disease.
So proven,
Proven.
We're talking peer-reviewed research.
Yes,
in
absolutely. It's not just somebody, people just calling it a disease. It's been proven to be a disease. So, and it's proven that we do have a genetic, you can have a genetic disposition to that, especially if you have, family history of that.
So it could be inherited the same way the doctor asks you if you have a history of heart disease, cancer, or whatever. Okay.
Absolutely. So when you get, when you're prescribed opiates, as in 2000, up to through this past year, I mean, they were just giving them out like crazy, like candy. And that's just a whole nother issue of how the pharmaceutical companies basically convinced the medical community that the Oxycontins were safe and non-addicting. And that's just a whole nother animal to get into. But when you prescribe these opiates, and my daughter, let me just give an example. My daughter had a breast reduction at 18 years old, and she was prescribed opiates. And it fueled her addiction. And when you can't, then you become addicted to them. And when you can't get the opiates, and they cut you off, then you start wanting to buy them on the street, and they're so expensive to buy the pill. So then there's always an alternative, and that's heroin.
Prior to her surgery at 18 years old, to your knowledge, she had not been
not in opiates.
Okay.
Yes, she used other drugs. She experimented in other drugs. She did that from the time she was a teenager.
Sure.
But it really fueled her addiction from when she had the surgery, and it was like, opiates were her best friend then. And it was always the monkey on her back. You always have a drug of choice. And when you're an addict or an alcoholic, you always have a drug of choice, and opiates were hers.
So more like other people, before she had this surgery, she might have experimented with marijuana or
Absolutely.
alcohol or whatever,
Right.
but then she gets prescribed opiates, and suddenly it's like,
That
whoa.
was it. It was the animal that just got unleashed inside of her.
Okay.
And but what happens is, so you can't afford to buy these. You buy so many off the streets, and they're just so expensive. And then somebody says, "Hey, try heroin." And everybody that I've been in contact with the stories, they're like, "I'll never do heroin," and then eventually they do the heroin. But I'm not gonna use a rig, which is a needle. I'm gonna just snort it, and then that only works so long, and you build up the resistance to that, and then they end up going to the needle. So what happens is, we've had this heroin epidemic, and it wasn't as fueled as it was in the last 5 to 10 years. But then what happened is fentanyl got introduced.
And so talk about what that is.
Okay, so fentanyl, people may, fentanyl patches is what a lot of elderly people, you may have grandma or grandpa that has, it is a drug for pain. And then you can even have the fentanyl patches. However, this fentanyl is coming from China mostly. And this is made in factories. And it is pressed into pills or into powder. And you have no way, that's why we have the FDA, so we can, monitor how these drugs are being distributed, and they have to, go with certain guidelines. It's a free for all over there. So, you don't know what the compounds are. You don't know the strength in this powder or the pill form. So this getting shipped here by the U.S. mail. You can order it over the dark web, and it's getting, they're putting it in heroin and using it instead of heroin because it's cheaper. and the drug dealers. And in fact, my daughter, her toxicology was complete fentanyl. She had no heroin in her system. Then in July, a month after my daughter passed away, carfentanil hit. And we were one of the first people here in Summit County to get carfentanil. And when the medical examiner's office got it, or, the FBI got, and was testing these drugs, they're like, we've never seen anything like this. What is this? This looks like, carfentanil. And they had to actually, contact zoos, I believe, because it's an elephant tranquilizer. That's what it's actually used for. Again, that is not something that the vets, somebody's getting, breaking into vet offices and getting that drug. That, again, is getting brought by U.S. mail from China. And then now Mexico's in on the act, and now Mexico's doing the same thing too. That's how it's getting over here. A lot of people are confused about that. This is through the dark web, and it's coming over here through the U.S. mail.
And we should be specific that, like, while you said fentanyl is a legitimate pain medication that can be used in a patch,
right?
Carfentanil, because of its strength,
yes.
Just only a few little granules of it can be deadly to a human being.
Exactly. And the fentanyl is dangerous too, because it's not like the fentanyl patches or a fentanyl painkiller that the doctor's giving. Again, these are being manufactured and not monitored. Nobody knows the dosage. It could, be pressed into a pill, and it could be, 4 times the amount of, of the normal fentanyl that would be in a fentanyl patch, or it could be, less. So there's no gauging the strength of it. It's just dangerous, very dangerous.
All right. Okay. I think that's important information, especially for people who don't understand. They hear, we hear that word fentanyl a lot, and carfentanil now.
Right.
And in terms of addiction, I've actually heard that there is a huge increase in elderly addiction. Have you heard about this?
I have heard about that. I get the coroner's report, and we kind of keep monitoring that just so we know in our advocating, and to make the public aware of what's out there. And you would not believe this, in mid-60s that are overdosing on fentanyl, too, as well, to bring that point. Secondly, yes, there's elderly who are getting addicted to fentanyl, and whether they can't get that, if they can't get their drug too, they're going to be, trying to get the drug on the street as well.
And for the same reason, because they're prescribed
Absolutely.
it, if you're elderly and you break your hip or something like that,
right.
or you have to have some major surgery like
yes.
a knee replacement, you get prescribed some kind of pain medication. The same process could happen.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, you talked about what Keys to Serenity does in terms of advocacy.
Yes.
And there are a couple of key points that I'd like you to see if you could expand on just a little bit. First of all, you talk about navigating the judicial system. Can you give us some?
Okay, so a lot of people don't. Okay, so there was somebody arrested there was a drug dealer arrested the night of my daughter's death. And so it was brought to the prosecutor's office, and he was arrested, and bail was, a bond was made. I had to figure out, I didn't know anything about how the judicial system worked. I didn't know that, what they were going to charge him with, and how the judicial system, I'm very well aware of how the judicial system works now through some county prosecutor's office. Most drug dealers, they're basically going after drug dealers that are not just users themselves and maybe have shared their drugs, or going to score a drug and maybe get extra so they can, get their drugs for free and selling it to people. They're going after the true drug dealers, and they're charging them with involuntary manslaughter when there's a death occurred. And so right now, all in Summit County, all of these cases are being pled out, and they're being pled out 3 to 5 years is what they are getting. My daughter's drug dealer was a little bit of a different situation. He was a known gang member and drug dealer, and they asked his bond to be high because he was on parole from another previous incarceration. So they asked the bond to be $100,000, which is $10,000 cash, and he made that in 10 days. And when he made that, he was driving around a white BMW with $4,000 in his pocket the night he was arrested as well, 23-year-old young man. So then he made the bail, and he got himself a lawyer and pushed the case out, and they kept trying to give him a plea deal, and he didn't want to take that plea deal. While he was on parole for a previous incarceration, and on bail for involuntary manslaughter. He was rearrested for carfentanil sales, distribution of carfentanil, stolen firearms, too. So his sentencing for everything together was only 8 years, and I really fought for that 8 years. I fought hard for that 8 years. I really gave the Summit County Prosecutor's Office a time. Let's just say that. And then and I protested that, and I got people, and I said, we're going to protest this, because my thing is, I want drug dealers to see that they're going to be prosecuted for, and whether it stops drug dealers, I'm not sure. I don't care if it stops 5 drug dealers. It's worth it to let them see that they are going after these people, and you will go to prison. When they're playing these cases out, you're not seeing it. The press is not getting a hold of it because it's getting pled out, and the prosecutor's office has only taken one to court, and that was when they first started prosecuting, and they have not taken any to trial. Everything gets pled out.
And by pled out, you mean that they accept some
They
kind
accept
of a
a plea.
bargain.
They accept a plea.
They
And it's
take so
usually
many years.
3 to 5 years
They
is
agree
usually.
to say that
That's right.
they're guilty.
Right. And knowing that if you are charged with under 5 years, you can ask for a judicial release, and I believe it's like 18 months or 2 years. If you get over 5 years, you have to at least serve that 5 years before you can ask for judicial release. So I protested, and I said, we're going to protest this. And we protested my daughter's, the sentencing hearing. And the media got a hold of it, and every news channel showed up, and it went live stream on Channel 5, on their social media, and it was on every news channel. And it was hard because when that happened, I was not prepared for that to happen.
You were also grieving.
I was grieving, and I was giving, the final parents, you have a chance to give your to talk to the judge, about your child, and before the sentencing, and I was not prepared for, that to be televised, but it was. And I thought, well, you know what, this is what needs to be. This needs to be, out there. But that opened up a lot of nasty comments because, of social media, because then lots of followers, and, and I had to deal with that, the comments, and, your daughter deserved to die. And if you were a better mother, your daughter wouldn't be dead, all these different things. And people accused me of doing drugs with my daughter when she died. It was just ridiculous. But I felt that I needed to protest, and I really needed to get, the media, to know, hey, somebody might be watching this to say, I might think about, dealing drugs that, can cause a death because I'm going to go to prison. So that was my reasoning for protesting.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, again, just, the judicial system, as you said, until you were thrust into that situation, like so many of us, we wouldn't know where to begin, how it works,
Yeah.
Unless you went to law school or something,
Right. And let me be clear too. It gave me no satisfaction. It didn't help me grieve. It didn't help me get finally somebody, justification. It does nothing. The only justification I got out of it was I got another, that another drug dealer was off the streets. And I pushed for that 8 years, to get that 8 years, the extra 1 or 2 years. He would possibly be off the street, not giving his poison to another child.
Right. Good for you. So you also mentioned in particular juvenile court. So would you like to talk a little bit about how that comes into play in the foundation?
Right. Of how to navigating the system.
I mean, is it part and parcel of what you're talking about in terms of the judicial system? Or is it
the judicial
separate?
system's a whole nother. If there's a child left behind, I was not aware that if a mother is unwed, and they pass away, basically nobody has custody of that child. Even if there's a father if they're not married, it's a whole different thing in Ohio. So if there's a father even on the birth certificate, and he has signed the birth certificate, that doesn't automatically give him custody. So there's steps you have to take. I wanted custody, and then the grandfather wanted custody too. We didn't think that Wyatt's father was capable of actually raising Wyatt, so we both went, we both went to try to get custody. So I had explained to parents, what's going to happen through the juvenile court of how you have to get custody of that child. Somebody has to file; it just doesn't automatically, So there's just things that you wouldn't possibly know unless you're experiencing that. So I can just help, with these parents and let them know that this is what they're going to face and this is the next step they should take, and.
And so that's how the juvenile court comes into play.
How to get custody, because that you actually don't go through domestic relations court. You actually go to juvenile court.
Okay. And so then the next thing on your list then is children's services. So how does that come into play?
So children's services, when there's an overdose, children's services is going to step in, and they're going to, and want to know, and how to navigate CSB, and I also help family members that maybe have a child that is an adult child that is using, and they basically dump the kids with the grandma, grandpa, and they don't have any kind of legal papers in place. They're just kind of raising these kids because mom or dad or both are, on the streets, and they're just, they're just too sick to take care of these kids. So I always, explain that they should get children's services involved because they can help them get, the legal paperwork, that they get the actual, so they can get them in school, and they can, if something happens, that they can get them to the hospital. So get all the legal papers signed and everything. So that's why we, helping with CSB, getting involved.
Okay. And then the last thing, and you have all these italicized in your spiel here on your website, which
Right.
I think is important, because I think it helps, people understand what it is exactly you guys do. And this last thing that you mentioned, and I think is worth talking about, is memorial arrangements. Because I do want to talk about stigma, and I think that's part of it.
Yes.
Especially when you're talking about memorial arrangements. But can you give us kind of a sense of how Keys to Serenity will help with that? I mean, is it financial?
Yeah, I give them a small donation of $50 for anybody that reaches out to me that lost a child here in Summit County. And so it's a small donation. It's not a lot, but I just had a family member reach out to me that I gave a $50 donation to. They're actually, I'm not going to mention their name, but they're actually here in Cuyahoga Falls. And this woman did not need the $50. But the fact, she came to me afterwards and she explained how, because I also give them a key necklace too, to know that we're in this together, and my business card, and you can call me because, if you're grieving, sometimes just having another mother that's been through it is really important, to be able to, lend an ear to. So this person got a hold of me and said, I didn't need that $50, but just the fact that you gave that to me meant so much to me, that, that you were just a helping hand. So it's not even about the amount, it's just about the connection.
Got it. And so in addition to maybe making a donation like that, you might help with like finding a funeral home, or?
Yes, absolutely. There's some I help them find a funeral home that, the cheapest. Unfortunately, most parents have to go the cheapest route because it's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. I mean, how do you save up for something like that? You're not prepared for something like that. So, it's a lot. So, and I can help them, get a good GoFundMe site started. And we even have some street ministers that will work with them and have a service in their church and, provide food afterwards and everything at no cost. So I have a lot of connections that I can help some people.
And this is different denominations?
Yes, just different denominations, exactly. And we're always looking for anybody that's, able to reach out and, help these families out too.
Good. That's great. And so you talked a little bit about getting custody of a grandchild already, which is part of what's here. But this question of stigma, I think, is very important.
Absolutely. So I felt it was really necessary to get first, let me say this. My daughter was very open on social media about her addiction and how, heroin was like the monkey on her back, always calling her name, and, and how it felt to be an addict. So I knew when she passed away, the next day, I told my son, I said, everybody's going to find out at the same time how she died. And we're not going to try to hide it. Sheena would have wanted people to know that relapse can happen even after years, or, and now finding out relapses are very, very common, very common. Now that I know more about the addiction, but we I just put it out there. I mean, I just threw my whole family out in the open and just like, this is what we're going to do. And I gave nobody a choice. I said, this is what I feel like she would want. And so I basically opened all the closet doors to my home and all the skeletons came out. There was I felt if I came forward and was brave enough to do that, that it would help, get the stigma, for other parents. We still have parents that still cannot be honest about how their child died. It's really sad because if you carry around that secret, you can't even talk. You would be afraid to even bring up your children because what if somebody, if you accidentally messed up and, and everybody's going to ask questions like, how'd your child die? It's just not normal, and to have a young person die and suddenly, and, people are going to want to talk about that and you're always going to be on guard and you can't grieve properly if you're going to living a lie. So I just hope, that it's really sad if there is, that there is some family. It's becoming more and more, less stigma involved and more families are coming forward and, talking about it right in the obituaries, that they died from addiction. And I think it's important. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like maybe you can speak to this too. I feel like there is a certain sort of like a hand, right, of things that people say against addiction. And one of the common ones that I hear is this question of personal responsibility. Like
Yes.
if you're an addict, it's your fault. And you've spoken to this a little bit already in terms of it being, it could be hereditary. It could be, it's a legitimate, genetic condition. But that's one of the big ones I hear is this question of personal responsibility that if you're an addict, you made the decision to do drugs. And the way I usually respond to that particular one is I say, well, I know that I did a lot of dumb things when I was young. And if one of those dumb things that I had done would have been to use a highly addictive drug even one time, I certainly would hope that people would have a little bit of pity for me the same way that, I did a dumb thing, whatever I might have done in high school or something, right?
Right. Many things have been said. One of the biggest things that people always say, I just don't understand it. If there is, they know there's fentanyl out there. Why are they even doing this drug? Well, first of all, I always say this. Once they're addicted, it's like an alien took over their brain. They cannot make rational decisions anymore. Secondly, they don't want to be addicts. They don't like the life they live. I think some people have the thought that, they go out and score heroin and, let's go party and have a good time like you do when you drink alcohol and party. That's not usually how it is. They have to have that heroin or the opiates or the fentanyl or whatever just to be able to not be sick. So some people are just feeling their addiction, just maintaining so they're not sick every day. As far as the stigma, I always tell people, listen, it's not our job to understand it. There's a lot of things I don't understand that people do, that people are experiencing, personal experiences. That doesn't mean that they're not experiencing them and that we shouldn't support them. It's not our job to understand it. Our job is to help. So there's still stigma out there. The stigma has changed so much from 2016 because almost everybody that never had, maybe they don't have it personally in their family, they know somebody that has either overdosed or that is addicted somewhere down the line in their extended family. So they kind of are starting to understand more. My family is a good example of it. They knew nothing about heroin or drugs, but now they educate themselves on it. They know. They look up every article because their niece died from it. So, then they'll be so, they'll be like, oh, I understand that. And they understand a lot about addiction because of having it happen in their family.
Yeah. And and just like you're saying, the exposure of it, the openness of addiction now, has led to a situation in which we hear about it from the news media and from politicians now all the time. And I know that you had kind of a close relationship, maybe not close, I don't know, with John Kasich, and now we have a new governor, Mike DeWine.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you've been supported? And I also know, and I want to say, Drew Riley, councilman for Ward 1 in Cuyahoga Falls, was very adamant that I reach out to you to talk about the event that we're going to discuss in just a little bit here. And I know that other people on council. So can you talk a little bit about how the political sphere has been helpful to you and supportive of this foundation?
So I was asked by Senator LaRose a year and a half ago to give testimony. He was working on a bill called Senate Bill 1, and that was to make fentanyl and carfentanil a higher degree felony, and to mandate jail sentences would be mandated when there was a death occurred, that there would be automatic mandated, jail sentences. He asked me to go down to the State House to give a testimony on that. And that's kind of what started all this. And so I went down 3 different times and gave testimony. And they invited me whenever the bill was signed by Governor Kasich, right at the end of his term. When he, and so I went down there while that bill was being signed. And then as far as Mike DeWine, I knew him as Attorney General, and when he was running, and I was really appreciative of what he was doing as far as fighting the opiate epidemic. I thought he did a great job as Attorney General, and so whenever he ran for governor, I was really supporting him with governor to be governor, and and he was against issue 1 came up, with issue 1. Was in November, was on the ballot.
Yeah,
I was totally against issue 1.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I work with both Democrats and Republicans, and I'm now I will be going back down to the State House again, working on a kinship bill. And this is a Democrat out of Cleveland, State Rep Booth, introduced this bill, and this kinship bill would be helping grandparents raising grandchildren, because that's another thing that we haven't even touched, and we need so much support. And I'm one of those grandparents, and I have a grandparents raising grandchildren support group now. So I will be going down, and we're going to be getting some Republicans on behind this too, and we're going to kind of combine a bill, and I'll be going down and lobbying at the State House to get this passed, it's a feel-good bill. It's going to pass. Everybody's going to be wanting to be involved with this because it's a good bill.
Good.
It's a good bill.
And locally too, I know the mayor is pictured with you on your website.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, Councilman Riley and others.
Yeah. I really, I felt that it was really important when people here in Cuyahoga Falls were running for council to reach out to those people. And I went to a lot of different, when they were raising money and they were having their get-togethers, and I would, confront them. What do you know about the opiate epidemic? This is a very important topic here in Cuyahoga Falls. If you look at the zip codes, 44221 is 5th or 6th in the county, or overdose deaths, and just overdoses here in the whole county. So you better be aware of what's going on. And so Drew Riley was one of them that said, and he was running, and he said, I don't know much about it, but I'm willing to learn. And that's how Drew and I got together. And he supported me on a kids event that I had this past summer for kids affected by addiction. And I've known Don Walters for a while, and I reached out to him when his son was suffering and battling his addiction, and my daughter did as well, and he knew my daughter too. So when my daughter passed away, him and I have just stayed. He's very supportive of the opioid epidemic and any help, and he was one of the first cities to get the quick response team, and so he's really rallying and really doing well, and he's opiate task force meetings and whatnot. So
go ahead and tell us about the opiate task force.
Opiate task force is in Summit County. It's ran by the ADM board, Akron Drug and Mental Health Board, and it is community leaders and and just residents that come together that want to help fight this addiction. And then they have subcommittees, a family subcommittee, and the laws and means and ways, and there's these different subcommittees, and they just look at different ways to help the addiction, and the opiate addiction. So there's many leaders, and that they usually meet quarterly, and it's a great, I'm part of that too.
And so it's advisory.
It's yes, and anybody that has any kind of events going on, they will put those on their website. Go on the ADM website and look up Summit County Opiate Task Force.
Okay, great. All right, now your colleague Vicky could not join us today, but
right.
We have I have some information here about OhioCAN, so perhaps you can speak to some of that. I was looking at the mission statement, and I think that there's sort of 3 E's here, right? Embrace, educate, empower.
Yes.
People who have been impacted by substance
Yes.
abuse. It could be I suppose, the actual victims or family or whatever. And I think that educate obviously makes a lot of sense. It's kind of part of what we're doing here today,
Right.
and a lot of what you're doing with Keys to Serenity as well. Can you talk about embracing and empowering people who've been impacted?
Yeah. I'm part of OhioCAN. I'm not as involved as some of the other ladies in OhioCAN.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. We
That's
should
okay.
say Ohio Change Addiction Now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the empowering and we talked about embracing. So these are made up with some women that and men too. There's OhioCAN all through the state of Ohio. This just happens to be the Summit County branch. Men and women that have been affected with their children being addicted and or in, whether they're in or in they're clean right now or they're in active addiction, embracing them and letting them know that there's, kind of like what I do with these family members that have lost a child, to let them know that there's help out there, because as a parent, when your child's actively using, there's a lot of, who do you go to talk to? You can't go to your school tea and talk, or go to tea or go to with your school friends, your old school friends, and say, hey, by the way, my child's an addict. What do I do? People would look at you like you had two heads. So this is a way that they can talk, amongst each other and embrace each other and educate each other on like what is the proper way to deal with situations. So you're not, enabling, your child. And
so the OhioCAN organization is facilitating that.
Yes.
Giving people the opportunity.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
through support groups and things like that.
And they do a big event in May, and you'll be talking to probably Vicki about that too.
Yeah. I want to talk about that too.
Sure.
But I just wanted to talk about OhioCAN a little bit. It talks about innovative harm reduction. Can you talk about that at all?
Okay, so harm reduction is made up of many things. Harm reduction is Narcan, providing Narcan for overdose victims, and that is it brings somebody back from an overdose. Needle exchange, they believe in needle exchange, and that's part of harm reduction, and providing clean needles. Fentanyl test strips. Those are just some of the things that harm reduction is. What harm reduction means is to providing these people that are in active addiction with love and respect, rather than shunning them, basically. And giving them, and not everybody believes in needle exchange and giving clean needles, but we have a hepatitis epidemic, and it's rising, hepatitis here in Ohio. So we need to, make sure that, we're providing clean needles. And that's not us. That's Summit County Health Department does that. But again, the harm reduction is they support harm reduction.
Yeah. And so just to step back for 1 second, we mentioned it sort of in passing issue 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you were opposed to it, but I also know that you are supportive of reform.
Yes.
Right. Can you tell me a little bit about like the things that you would like to see change in terms of how we deal with addiction?
Yeah.
In sort of the legal
Right.
area?
Right. So I have an event that I do every 3 months along with Akron Say No to Dope. We teamed up, and we did it. We've done this for a year now, and it's called Keys to a New Habit, and it's helping people in recovery gain the skills to get back into society. So we had 2 of the judges come. We had Judge McKinney come, and he spoke on license. There's a new licensed amnesty program out there right now that'll get some of the fines off, and that's one of the problems with people in recovery is that a lot of them don't have their license because of all these back fines. So we give this program to help. He comes in and sits down with each person coming in and looks at their BMV and like maybe puts them on a payment plan. Or right now, like I said, we have the amnesty program that's going to get rid of a lot of these fines. Some of these people are getting $1,000 off their fine so they can get their license back. And then we have Judge Joy Oldfield came in, and we just had our meeting we just had our program a week ago. And she talked about the new felony it's sealants. I call it felony expungements, but she explained to me that felony expungement's not the proper word, felony sealings. And that is sealing these felonies. And that gets back to issue 1. Some of the issue 1 was not charging people that were caught with drugs, with any kind of felony, and they were just going to be charged with misdemeanors. I personally believe, with a lot of advocates that I work with, that sometimes having that felony, over your head would possibly help you get clean, because the first time that you catch a felony from possession of drugs, you have the chance to go through drug court and get that felony dropped. But the program that we had last Wednesday, was a new amnesty felony expungement program or sealing, where you can get so many of your felonies sealed. And that's important. And that was on issue 1. There was a lot about issue 1 that I liked, but a lot that I didn't like. It was too much. It was so vague, and it was so much and all piled into. It was a very sloppy bill, I believe. And I think that part of it we loved, but the other part we hated. So we just had to go, myself and the people that I work with, went against it. We just were not for it. That releasing prisoners, that it was just crazy. So, but yes, I do believe in helping people, and I want to see, especially when people get clean and they're in recovery and they have these felonies looming over their head, and it's hard for them to get apartments, and it's hard for them to get jobs. More and more people, though, I will say, are more open on hiring felons, especially when they sit down. It used to be, felon, nope, no way, I won't even interview the person. But a lot of people will get interviews now, and they'll explain to them, listen, I have felony from drug possession, and I've been clean for 5 years. And a lot of people employers are overlooking that and letting employees come into their workforce because they're in recovery now. So,
and it's so public now.
It is absolutely.
So, okay, and then one other thing that this talks about that maybe you can speak to is medicine-based treatment. Now, is that just Narcan, or are there other?
So MAT, it's considered MAT.
Okay.
A medical-assisted treatment is Suboxone, Vivitrol. Those are just a couple of them. So Suboxone, without getting into the technical part of it, basically people that are addicted to opiates can get on a Suboxone program. And it is a film that gets a strip that they put underneath their tongue, and it blocks the receptors. So you can't, it fills the receptors, and then it blocks any kind of opiates that if you tried to use heroin with it, you would become sick. And it fills those receptors that in the brain that are lacking, that need that heroin, and it kind of gives them the edge to be able to quit, the heroin and take the Suboxone instead. Vivitrol is an injection that is sort of similar to that. It's too much to go into with all the medical part of it, of what it does, but it actually, they get that shot, I believe, every 3 months, and it also blocks the receptors and it either blocks or fills the receptors so that they don't have the cravings for the heroin.
So they could go off the drug. They wouldn't get sick from not being on the drug, and if they tried to use it,
right,
would also
again.
get them sick.
And there's some, there's people that don't believe in medical assisted treatment, which we call MAT. There's people there's stigma involved with that, with the recovery, people in recovery, and some people that are in AA and NA, and you're not really clean because you're on you're on Suboxone, you're on subs, or you're on Vivitrol. But listen, if it's keeping them safe, you're not going to overdose from it. You're not going to die from it. So if it means, this is a lifelong disease, this addiction, and we may have to look at different ways. This is just my opinion of treating this lifelong disease with lifelong medicine. And yes, they may be addicted to the Suboxone, but if it's going to keep them from, if they can maintain just with that and keep them from, going and doing dangerous things to get their drug, they would be getting it every, dosed every day with it and getting a prescription for it and not having to, worry about overdosing and dying. I'm all for it.
Is methadone something that's still
Methadone
used?
is actually giving a dose of actual heroin, and it's you're dosed daily. So methadone is a whole different program.
So it's like a controlled.
It's a controlled heroin. Yes, you go there and get dosed every day.
And then they just reduce the amount over time.
And then they reduce the amount over time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
but it doesn't seem as common as it used to be.
That's right, because there's the subs out there, Suboxone, and and now the Vivitrol too.
Okay, I think there's another event that Keys to Serenity sponsors that is separate from the other one you talked about with the kids, right?
Yes, that's a program it's my program. The Keys to the Heart. Not only do I have the Keys to the New Habit, which is the helping people in recovery, but I also have a program called Keys to the Heart. I just did my first one last August. I wanted to do something to give back to the kids that are affected by addiction in their home. And these are kids that have lost a parent, They maybe have a parent that is absent in their life because of incarceration, or the parents are just too sick to take care of these kids. They're grandma, grandpa, or aunt and uncle's taking care of these kids in foster care. These are kids that have been affected by addiction in their home, not just heroin. It could be alcoholism or, any kind of drug. And I wanted to get back to these kids, and we haven't concentrated on the kids. We forgot about the kids. These kids are the silent victims, basically, in this epidemic. And there's lots of kids out there right now. Just in Summit County alone, we have almost 800 kids in the foster care system. 80% of those are due to drugs in the home. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to get back to these kids, first of all. And I wanted them to see that there's other kids and maybe make some connections with those kids to know that they are not alone. And my grandson's one of them. So I had this free event last August, and we had it at the Cuyahoga Falls Moose Lodge in their pavilion. We have a bunch of property out there and a beautiful pavilion, outside pavilion. So we had it there, and OhioCAN helped out last year. This year, they're really going to be more involved in putting on that event. That's going to be August 10th. And again, it's going to be at the Cuyahoga Falls Moose Lodge. And everything was free. We had 150 kids sign up last year. And we just gave them, animal shows and, face painting and gift bags, and everything was free. Photo booths, and just a free event. And we had Kid Jam Radio come out, and it was a 6-hour event of just filled with free things for these kids to give them a day of love and give them, a day for themselves. And so we're going to be doing that again, and OhioCAN is going to be helping me out with that this year.
That sounds awesome. It really does. And I want to ask at the end what people can do to support you, and just in general what people can do. But can we talk about steps of change? So May 18th, 2019, here in the Falls downtown at the Pavilion, right?
Yes.
It says it's a substance use awareness event. Can you talk a little bit about it? It looks like you guys have a lot of participating people.
The city of Cuyahoga Falls has teamed up with OhioCAN this year and sponsored this event, which is going to be huge. And it's going to be at the Falls Riverfront, and it's going to be May 18th. And Steps of Change, they've been doing every year, and they do it in every county that they have that OhioCAN is in. They do a shoe memorial, and this shoe memorial, my daughter's shoes were in there the year after 2016, and and we lost 347 just in Summit County alone, and all the shoes were of the people that have lost their life that year and were around the track at Bullock, because they had it at Bullock. And just to look at those shoes and to imagine bodies in those shoes, and just it's astronomical. They also do Narcan training there, and they do educational tables, and so anybody can come and they have events for the kids too. Can come that they're not even affected by addiction in their home, and learn about addiction and what it means, and they can be educated. Or a family member can come in that maybe is struggling with their kids that are abusing drugs, and they can come in and get the support by many of the different tables that are going to be there. And people also come that have lost a child, just to memorialize, to see the memorial and memorialize their child.
Cool. So, and you guys are getting support from, it says Summit County Juvenile Court,
Yes,
Turning Point, OhioCAN,
Yeah.
City of Cuyahoga Falls,
Right.
Keys to Serenity.
Yes,
obviously.
there's so many involved this year. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a great event, and that's going to be at the Falls Riverfront, and that's 12 to 5 on May 18th. And everything's free there. So there'll be some raffle baskets to help out, with OhioCAN to, so they can raise some money too, and tons of speakers there.
Cool. And so I guess, and like I said, like just to wrap up, like, can you tell us a couple of things that people can do? Now, I know that, like, for instance, like some of the obvious things would be to give money or volunteer with some of these organizations like Keys to Serenity or OhioCAN.
Right.
And I also know that there are like at Steps of Change, there's Narcan training,
Right.
Things like that people can do. And I know that was something that Drew did. I remember seeing pictures of him.
Yeah,
doing
I got him into the Narcan training, and he got Narcan trained. That's awesome.
Yeah, so Councilman Riley is available if somebody needs help, I suppose.
Yeah.
But what are some other things that people could do? Because the opioid epidemic, like you say, it permeates the city and the country and the world in so many different ways. Like, if I was a musician or a puppeteer, I could come to the Keys to
Right.
the Heart
Right.
event. But what are some other things?
You know, there's tons of resources out there, and just get educated. Basically, that's the most important thing. Get educated on addiction. If you don't know anything about addiction, get educated, because sometimes by having, the media loves to put all the bad stuff out, about addiction, and they're not putting the good stuff out about the people that are recovering and becoming, citizens, good citizens. But just to, I always think education, I would say, please educate yourself about addiction, because when you share some of those different articles on social media or talk, when somebody's talking, you could speak up if you're educated and say, no, that's not true. There is no Narcan parties, just as much as you think that there is. That's just a myth. There's not Narcan parties where everybody just gets together and shoots heroin and, somebody stays around in Narcans all day long, or Narcan is not necessarily free. Just those kind of things. Education is so important. There's so much information out there that you can educate yourself with just on social media alone. Educating, being there and being supportive of people that have lost a child or have a person in their family that's in active addiction, and just being there for them, and being there supportively, and just to be their support system for them, and obviously financially too. The grassroots organizations like myself, we get no funding. We do this all on our own. We have to have jobs, and we do this on our free time. And the only way we can do anything is with money. And the money never seems to rain down on us, And one of the things that
Common problem.
yes, that I brought up with Mike DeWine when he came in, and he was here in Falls, and he was, I'm like, oh, I'm going to ask him, and I told him, I said, if you do get into as governor, and you do call for a state of emergency, when there's financial, that money gets distributed to different organizations and different, and then they distribute the money, so it gets done statewide into different counties, and then counties then distribute it how they think. It never rains down on us, and one of his big political pieces was, and most people that were running, and any politician that was running this year or last year always bring up the opioid epidemic, and they talk about, how, these grassroots organizations, these parents that have lost children, they're the ones that are doing all the work. They're going to be the ones that actually, to get this fixed. And if we can ever, I don't know if we're ever going to overcome this addiction problem, but if we can ever put a dent in it, it's going to be the grassroots organizations that are in the trenches and helping out, but the money never hits us.
So donating to something like Keys to Serenity, or maybe even like, at the ballot box, supporting politicians who we know are going to try to take care of organizations like yours who are making a difference.
Yeah, so far that's not happened, but I asked DeWine, I'm like, and he's like, I'm going to look into it, and I got him. He got in, and so I'm going to give him a couple months, and then I'm really going to hit him. I'm like, where's our money? When's it going to hit? When's it going to rain down on us? Because
I'm sure Mike DeWine is listening. So.
I'm sure Mike DeWine's like, oh no, I did say that.
So, and I still want to know if there are other things you can tell us we can do, but it occurs to me that I would like to know if you have if you've dealt with the police and the sheriffs, like how have they sort of embraced your support, or
Oh yeah, I really do. Right here in Cuyahoga Falls, we have the quick response team. Cuyahoga Falls is one of the first cities to adopt this in Summit County. If you overdose in your home, and you're Narcan, with the fire department, or they get your name and number, and they come to your door, and they will be maybe a recovery coach and somebody from the fire department, and and they're like, we're not here to arrest you. We're not here to, you're not in trouble. We want to help you. And they come to you, and if you don't answer the door, they'll come back the next week, and they will be like, let's get you into treatment. Let's get you the help. So they're embracing their people in their community, and not just saying, oh, they're just, they go to them and say, we don't want you to overdose and die. We want to get you the help. And so, so I think that's a great thing that the city's doing, definitely.
Yeah. And the county sheriffs.
The county sheriffs, they're working hard too. I don't really deal with the county sheriffs that much, but they're, everybody's, I really believe that, dealing with, I think that most people, police and sheriffs, really have they've seen enough of it. They know what is out there, and yeah, it gets frustrating. It gets frustrating. My daughter-in-law's a ER nurse. It gets frustrating always, having come in, maybe the same people. but you have to understand it's a sickness, and they're just, and yes, it's a lot of it's personal. You have to be responsible for your own actions. I get that, but these people are sick, and we really need to give them, the support they need to get them well. And by shunning them, it's not going to happen. It's kind of like the homeless. We just have to really embrace them and help them. And most of these people, including my daughter, have mental health issues too. And my daughter had the worst anxiety in the world. She couldn't stand, to be around a bunch of people. She was never felt secure about herself, and never, she always felt like an outsider. There's always so much mental health issues involved with that too. These people have problems,
Anything else people can do? We talked about supporting organizations like Keys to Serenity and educating yourselves.
Right.
As far as like volunteering or any of that kind of
stuff.
Yeah,
they can volunteer. You can get a hold of me on Keys to Serenity. You can go on my website, keystoserenity.org, or reach out to me, keystoserenityohio@gmail.com. And we need lots of volunteers for August. So if they want to come out, and there's, everything's, there's no paid people out there. Everybody volunteers to, cook the food and serve the food, and give out bags, and and give out all kinds of things. If you have an organization that maybe wants to do a booth and do something for the kids as far as a craft, make a craft with the kids or something, reach out to me.
Cool. Yeah. And so I just want to mention too, Ohio Change Addiction Now, OhioCAN. Yeah. They have a website for this whole state organization, and then the Summit County chapter of OhioCAN is available on Facebook, facebook.com/OhioCAN Summit County.
Yes.
And they can check that page to get more information about steps of change, about OhioCAN in general, and anything with regard to things that people can do, or ways people can get involved to help change the opiate epidemic.
Right. The last words of my daughter's obituary was, Sheena would not want us to cry. She would want us to fight. And that's what I'm doing.
Good for you. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks. You've been listening to the Falls Free Press podcast. This episode was produced by Bart Sullivan and Alex Hall. Today's guest was Brenda Ryan from the Keys to Serenity Foundation, with your host Alex Hall. For more information on Keys to Serenity, visit keystoserenity.org. For more content like this from the Falls Free Press, check out our website at fallsfreepress.com.